Welcome back, America, to this Just the News, Real America's Voice special brought to you by our good friends at Heritage Action for America. One of the places where the new Congress will have a profound effect will be on the world stage. How America projects its power, how economic policy here will enhance or weaken our security abroad are all things that Congress has a hand in. And with the change in leadership to Republicans in the House, a lot of new policies are beginning to shift. We have the perfect first guest to walk us through how these changes are going to play out on the world stage. She's advised cabinet secretaries, governors, presidents. She's a former deputy national security advisor to the United States. She is Victoria Coates, currently a senior research fellow at Heritage Foundation. Victoria, great to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Jen. Good to be with you.
So there is a lot going on in this brand new Congress. And a lot of people think of Congress and they think, domestic policy, economics, but a lot of what Congress does affects foreign policy and America's perception in the world. How has the Republican majority begun to reshape thinking in the world?
Yeah, this is going to really be a fascinating moment because traditionally, yes, the domestic issues have really been the purview of the Congress and international affairs have been left to the executive branch. But certainly after 2 years of the Biden administration, conservatives can't let things go on like this. So, we started out with the disaster in Afghanistan, which was so damaging to our general reputation. We've gone through a series of additional very difficult moments, basically abandoning our Gulf allies, doing some material damage to our relationship with Israel, and then capped off by the long grinding war in Ukraine after Putin's invasion, which has been going on for a year with no end in sight. And I think given the administration's real refusal to articulate a clear, fulsome strategy for how they are going to manage things like our relationships in the Middle East, our critical strategic relationships, how we are going to bring an end to this war in Ukraine with a decisive defeat for Putin, because we do not want to be doing this again in 5 years. Republicans in Congress who are going to have to play a front and center role on this and force the administration to see that it is not irrational to say that while we are paying attention to Ukraine's borders, we also need to secure our own borders. And that if we want to win the war in Ukraine, which is largely an energy war, we're going to have to attend to our domestic energy production. And first and foremost, and this will be the topic of coming weeks, if we plan to be able to do a World War II style mobilization to confront the People's Republic of China, should that become necessary, we have to get our fiscal house in order. These things are intimately linked. We've got to end the out of control woke spending here in Washington if we want to do that.
So true. And a lot of people say, well, the spending, what does that have to do with national security? A lot of people very concerned by recent developments. Saudi Arabia announcing that it might consider other currencies to take oil and transact oil on, not just the American currency. The dollar and its standing as the world currency really could be put at risk by the upcoming debt ceiling debate. Tell us a little bit about why that's so concerning.
Well, it's concerning because it's completely unnecessary. It is absolutely within our power to rein in this spending. We had an unexpected sort of fiscal hawk emerge in the form of the president, who's very excited right now to tout about how much he's brought the deficit down, which isn't really the greatest marker because it just means you're still spending more than you should, but maybe just a little bit less than you had been the year before. And we know that's all because of the end of the COVID program. So it's kind of illusory anyway. But at least he's paying lip service to it, which means it's important to the American people. But, folks are fond of saying, it's 1940 in terms of China. We have to be prepared for a significant military buildup. I am hugely in favor of a robust military. I think the vast majority of Americans are. We need to maintain our edge in that sphere. But we're not going to be able to if we don't get our house in order now. And I think what the House Republicans have proposed in terms of prospectively freezing defense expenditures at 2022 levels, which was a victory as recently as last month in terms of the levels of the 2022 National Defense Authorization Act, that should not be out of the realm of the possible. And if we look at the military and we say, we are going to stop the crazy social engineering programs, the climate extremism that's costing a lot of money, and we are going to focus on lethality and warfighting, I think you would have tremendous support for that within the Congress. But then you're also going to have to rein in the completely insane domestic spending that has consumed all of this. And if you go back to the atrocious $1.7 trillion omnibus legislation that was jammed through at the end of the last Congress, only 46 billion of that, which is an amazing statement, only 46 billion of that was for Ukraine, but it was stuffed into this omni. So if you wanted to support Ukraine, and people can have varying views on that, but you weren't even allowed to debate it. You just had to do the whole 1.7 trillion. So, what the defense spending is a fraction of what is actually bankrupting our country, which is putting our credit at risk. And as you say, could ultimately put the dollar at risk. The dollar is one of the most critical national security tools we have in the U.S. arsenal, and it should be protected as such. And that Democrats would be willing to put it at risk because of this crazy spending that they're insisting on, I really think is outrageous.
Yeah, it's amazing to think that Congress raised the credit card spending, but didn't raise the limit, and even knowing that spending would go over it, it created this artificial moment of crisis, which is remarkable. Victoria, I want to turn to something because for 2 years, Nancy Pelosi kept China pretty much off the docket of Congress. So we didn't know where Democrats were. Republicans come in, and right away they have 2 votes. And the majority of Democrats cross over and say, yeah, we want to ban China from buying oil from our strategic petroleum reserves. And we do want a select committee to study the China threat, something that Nancy Pelosi wouldn't allow. What message did that send to the world, particularly to our allies in the Pacific Rim?
It's a critical message of clarity. And I'd like to think it takes us back to the better days of not that the Cold War was better, but the better times in terms of bipartisan agreement that the Soviet Union was a terrible threat and that all Americans should be united in opposition to Soviet expansionism and the Soviet clearly stated desire to wipe democracy and capitalism off the planet. The Chinese have made the same declaration that they think democracy is a bad system, antithetical to the nature of the Chinese people. I think that's actually a bald-faced lie. You could look across the strait, you see Taiwan. The Chinese people are perfectly capable of democracy given the chance, but their communist overlords currently won't let them do that. But I think the American people really over the last 6 years, certainly since the beginning of the Trump administration, have developed a clarity on this. And so all Congress people, I believe, are receiving inquiries from their constituents about what they're doing about China. I think the issue of selling our strategic petroleum reserve resources to China is a very clear threat to our national security. China buying farmland, among other real estate assets, is a clear threat. The theft of intellectual property is a clear threat, and the Chinese military buildup is a clear threat. So I think for all of these reasons, you will have the potential for counter-China, pro-America actions in this Congress, and it may be a unique topic along those lines.
Yeah, that it will, certainly compared to the past few years where we'd have no discussion of it. It's really remarkable. Victoria, about 90 seconds left. I want to ask this. With a new Congress comes fresh ideas. And one of the most interesting ideas that Republicans have put on the table is the need to do a comprehensive study of how our adversaries have gotten a stronghold in various strategic parts of the supply chain that could strangle America or put our national security at risk in a time of conflict. How important is that's an issue you haven't heard talked about for a long time. How important is it to understand the threats and the kinks in the supply chain and begin to create solutions for it?
It's critical. And I think there are many areas in the world that we can look to. Southeast Asia, first and foremost, is developing as a supply chain hub. We could look at North Africa. We could look very much at Latin America. It would be a great thing for our hemisphere. But what we have to avoid, John, and we are watching this happen in real time, is the Biden administration trying to force an energy transition on the United States from fossil fuels to renewables, and that supply chain is almost irrevocably tied to communist China. They've actually done a great job of cornering that market. So we have to become reliant on them if we want to endure that transition. It's not necessary. We have ample, increasingly clean fossil fuels. We have fission. We have the promise of fusion now down the pike. We can get to a much lower emission posture that should satisfy even the most extreme climate folks. And we don't have to do it by putting our energy security in the hands of the communist Chinese.
Yeah, that's such a big lie to knock down. Republicans do have a greenhouse gas plan. It used natural gas and nuclear power to get to the same targets as Democrats, and that's a lot more achievable than windmills and solar. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Victoria, it's such a great honor to have you on. You bring clarity to a very confusing world. We really enjoyed the time today.
Always good to be with you, John. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Folks, we'll be right back with one more engaging conversation with a key member that has his ear to the ground, listening to what the grassroots of America is saying. By the way, all policies in America succeed when the grassroots gets behind it. We'll have that conversation with Ryan Walker from Heritage right after this commercial break.